Hey guys, welcome to our first Photoshop class. This is the first in a multi-part series. I'm not quite sure how many classes we're going to go to until everyone's tired of learning. But today we're going to talk about just an intro to the interface, go over like the basics, the move tool, the type tool, put some type down, move it around, change the font, change the color, just adjust a little bit and kind of get used to the interface and oriented. So we can build upon that. Each class is going to build, so I recommend you watch these in order, unless you feel like you have a good foundation and you can skip ahead. The next class is going to be vectors, but for now, let's jump into it. So starting right off, a little orientation of what all these different panes are. On the left-hand side, we've got your toolbar here, and these are a lot of different options for tools you can use within the canvas. Today we're just going to be talking about the move tool at the top here, and you can get to it by selecting V, or the type tool here, which you can get to by selecting T. So V, T. And at the bottom here, we've got your swatches, the foreground color and the background color. So if you want to edit either of these, all you have to do is click on them and you'll get the color picker, and then you can mess around with the hue, the luminance, the saturation, whichever you're trying to adjust. Alright, so right now we don't actually have a document open. So first we'll need to create a new document, and that'll be our first command. Actually, we learned V and T. So our first command, key shortcuts, Command N. And all you have to worry about right now is the width and the height. And I like to set mine in pixels. It's easiest for me to work in, unless I'm doing something that makes more sense to do it in another measurement, such as inches. So 500 by 700 should be perfect for today's lesson. Alright, so now I've got a blank canvas, and we see on the right hand side a background layer has been created under our layers pane. Now, this is where you'll see all your layers start to build up as you create them, or they're created automatically when you use some of the other tools. So let me show you how something is created automatically. So right now we're in the type tool by hitting T, and I click on the screen anywhere and I can start typing. Oh, that purple is horrible. Regardless, so I've typed in what I've got, and when you're done typing, so let's do that again. Click, type, and then hit Command Enter, and you'll commit your type changes for then. Not commit forever, you can go back and adjust them all you want, but you're no longer in editing mode. So, okay, so now we've got two type objects. And now you can see there's two layers here that have been created for us. So when you create type on the canvas, layers are automatically made for you. Now, if you want to just create a blank layer, you can do that at any time by going down here to the layers pane, and to the bottom right, there's delete layer and create layer. So if you hit create new layer, it creates a blank layer above the one you currently have selected. So if I select the background, it's going to create a layer right here, right underneath the first high world, or the bottom high world, however you want to think about it. There we go. And we can delete that layer, and we can delete that layer. Now, going back to the type tool, which we still have selected here, or you can hit T if you're not selected it, don't have it selected. Now, instead of just clicking and then typing, we're going to click and drag a square rectangular bounding box, and then we can start typing. And what's different about this is that when you're typing in this, your words will only stay within this, and they won't go off to the right. They'll start a new line. So you see that when you've got too many characters to fit in one line, it goes to the next line. So this is good for paragraph text, for long text, any type of formatting you need to do that makes sense in a block. And you can see this bounding box has these squares, and you can select, hover over them, and you'll get the cursor will change to indicate that you can drag it in any way and adjust it, and the type will change once you do that. So once you figure out the size you want and the restrictions, you can format it how you'd like. Now, one thing to be aware of though is that if your type goes beyond the bottom of the bounding box, it will disappear. So if you ever are working with a bounded type and all of a sudden it disappears, you just need to make more room for it or make the font smaller, but it's still there. It just kind of, Photoshop makes it go away, disappears. Okay, so now let's go to the Move tool, which you can, of course, go by clicking or hitting V. Now, before we do any moving, I want to talk about the other great functionality that the Move tool does, which is selecting. Now, you can see I've got Hi Mama, I'm on YouTube selected here in the layer palette, and over here on the canvas, it's selected. Now, I can select any other like Hi World layer just by clicking on it. And I can do the same here in the layers pane and click on any of the other layers. Now, if I want to select multiple ones in the canvas, I would just hit Shift and click whichever other layers or objects I wanted to select. So we've got them all selected. However, if you hit Shift clicked within the layers pane, it'll select everything in between that layer and the one that's currently selected and the one you want to select. So if I hit the other Hi World, it will select all three of these. Now, if you just want to select one of them, you can do the Hi World and command click the other Hi World, and it won't select the Hi Mom in between. All right, so Shift click all of them, command click just the next one or whatever you're selecting. And if you just select one at any time without holding anything else, it will deselect everything else. The same goes for in the canvas. If you're on Hi Mom and you click on Hi World, it just switches. So now we can go on to moving. So now with the Hi World and the two Hi Worlds selected, we can move it, and it's just clicking and dragging. Click, drag it, and you'll probably get some guides that'll tell you to put it up against the side, and you might not, but it doesn't matter. Just put it wherever you need to. So that's great for moving it in freeform movement with the help of the guides. But if you want to make slight adjustments, you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard. So up, down, left, right just correspond to 1 pixel movements. Now if you want to jump 10 pixels, you hold down Shift and click the arrow keys, and you can move the type in any direction. Alright, so that's the nudge and the nudge big jump. I don't know the technical term for it. But, okay, so now that you can move stuff, let's change this type up because it's really boring being all the same. So, let's go over to the character pane here and adjust some of the things. Now, one thing that's interesting about type is that when you want to change the color of type, you don't use the foreground background on the toolbar over here. You actually use its own color swatch here that you click on to get the same color picker, but it's a different area, so you have to be aware of that. And one thing I want to point out here is when I take the cursor outside of the color picker, you'll see I get this eyedropper cursor, and that allows me to select any color on the canvas or in Photoshop. So this dark gray I can select, or I can select the white and you won't see it, or I can go back and select this lavender. So I'm going to set something a little bit darker so we have some variation here. Alright, now we've set the color. Let's change the font. So the font's this top select here at in the character pane, and you can select, I've got Patala Pro bold currently, but we can go to Patala Pro italic. Now this other select next to it allows you to select within that typeface a different variation of weight or how condensed it is or whatever options and fonts you have for that typeface. So I'll do light italic. Alright, and lastly, the last thing I'm going to cover in this character pane is the size right here. We'll go over the rest of this in another video, but for right now I just want to touch on the size. So you can type in something or you can select from the list here, so we'll go up to 48. Alright, so now you know how to change type, manipulate it, change the color, change the size, and change the font, all within this character pane. And then now I just want to touch on the paragraph pane very quickly. Allows you to change the alignment of the text here. We can be right aligned, we can be center aligned, and this works for both the text blocks and the text lines that we created in the 2 different ways with the text tool. There's left justified, which looks absolutely horrible, but yeah, so you can play around with that. And so that's all you're going to need for right now. So now we can adjust type. And the next tool, you know, we've talked about the move tool, and we've talked about the type tool and editing the type. There's one last thing I want to touch on before we get to the project for today's class, which is the transform tool. Now the transform tool is great. I use it all the time. All it is Command T on whatever layer or multiple layers you have selected. You'll get this bounding box, and you can drag this to anything and scale it up. And if you can drag and just do one, you know, the height. And anytime you do something and you're not happy with it, you can hit Command Z and undo it, and it'll go back. And Command Z works outside of the transform tool as well. For any mistake you make, you press Command Z and skip back one step. And the other thing that's great about the transform tool is you can rotate within it too. So if you hover just outside of the corners or even in the middle, it'll rotate. So you can click and rotate it. Very cool. Okay, now that's cool, but if you want to be exact, like let's say you want your type to be at 45 degrees, or you want to scale it up, but you want it to stay the same proportion, because if you stretch or condense types, it generally looks pretty crap. So when you're doing that, if you just hold down Shift, it'll constrain the proportions. And when you rotate and hold down Shift, it'll do 15-degree increments. Alright, so there we have adjusted our text and transformed it with the transform tool. Again, that is Command T. Really useful. Alright, the last thing I want to talk about right now is filling up a layer with color. So if we select the background color, and we can do this with any layer. So we have the background here in the toolbar, and we have this set to blue. Let's set it to a light yellow maybe. Alright, so that's going to look kind of garish, but anyways, if you hold Command Delete, it'll fill that whole layer with the yellow. And we can create a new layer, and do the same thing. And you'll see in the layers, it gives you a preview here, and it's yellow. Alright, so let's recap the shortcuts we talked about earlier, because I cannot stress enough about how important they are to speeding up your workflow in Photoshop. Now, I'm giving you the Mac shortcuts throughout these videos and classes, but if you're on a Windows machine, I think for the most part it's swapping in Control for Command, but there's a lot of, you know, some other funky ones. So I will post the Windows and Mac shortcuts in the description below, so check that out if you're on Windows. But starting off, we started with Command N, which opens up a new dialog window, and then we did T for the text tool and V for the move tool, and we talked about nudging, which is the arrow keys. And if you select a layer, you can do 1 pixel or 10 pixels at a time in any direction. We then talked about the transform tool, which is Command T, and gives us the bounding box. And then while we're transforming, holding Shift constrains the proportions and gives us 15-degree increments. And we also lastly talked about Command Z, undoing one step. And the very last one is filling a layer by doing command, let's just change this so you can actually see what I'm doing. Doing command delete, and it will fill the layer with color. Now you can't read any of that lavender, but anyways, that's a recap. So next we're going to get onto the project, and the project is to take any title that you find on the New York Times bestseller list and creating a book cover for that title and author, and you can use the short description that they have, the one sentence as well. Only using type and one color from the background, those are your constraints. So you don't have a ton of tools to work with, and that's what's really spurs great design is constraints. So that's really limiting, and I'll do another video where I'll walk you through how I did my version of this of the book cover and show you some of the examples from some of my coworkers that are taking this class in person, and we'll talk about how we did it. Alright, if you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments, and I'll be happy to answer them. And alright, have a good one. Bye. Till next time.